Hello every folks, good morning and welcome to a bit of a discussion on why the hell I'm so dang excited about Reborn. Now look, obviously, no matter what it would be, I would be excited. It's a Tactics Ogre thing. It is 100% my jam no matter what it ends up doing. But listen, there's a whole lot of stuff here that I feel like gets misunderstood a lot because, let's be honest, there's a lot when it comes to this series. There's a lot of complications, there's a lot of little nuance, and there's... it's weird because it's one of those series where you can't really put a hard and fast, this is always this case on practically any dang thing, if we're completely honest. It makes it very confusing to actually describe in any way. For example, you can't even get a straight answer in terms of how the damage works. Well, it depends is pretty much your answer on just about everything. Are you a good guy in the story? Well, it depends. Are you a bad guy? Well, it depends. Do you hurt things? Well, it depends. I mean, do you equip items? I mean, well, it depends. Sometimes you don't want to so they can move faster, you know? Just everything about these games has always been that same way. So I wanted to go over a lot of the changes that they've made and why it's not, I feel like a lot of folks come up with a whole idea of, it's been casualified or whatever else. But no, listen, there's a lot more at heart here that you can tell in the little subtleties all over the place. Okay, so for one thing, I actually never noticed this, but apparently the whole changing the borders around the map thing, that actually isn't a Reborn thing. Apparently that's actually always been the case. I've just never noticed. Yes, over a decade, this is just a detail I've never picked up on. And literally only just noticed now. But yeah, apparently the map actually being recolored in certain ways has always kind of been that way, but it seems more pronounced maybe in the new version. I don't know. Anyway, so little subtle changes. First thing, okay. Rogues being gone, okay? Look, I love rogues. They're one of my favorites. But listen, in the whole thing of they were removed for AI, if you hadn't heard about this, basically from Matsuno himself, they said that they weren't able to get the AI to work with them. So let me explain again. The AI has been rebuilt from the ground up for Reborn. Basically means that, it's been entirely remade to prioritize being able to adapt to things on the field. That's what they were saying. That the AI is supposed to be able to recognize choke points on maps. It's supposed to be able to recognize the conditions of your units and something more than just I want to go finish off that unit right now. Like I mentioned earlier, how excited I was to recommend Felseal anytime it came up. That was why, because you see an AI that's able to think ahead, and I've wanted I wanted Tactics Ogre to be able to do that for a while, and you can sort of simulate that through One Vision, because a lot of the stuff that he did in the background kind of tricks the AI into doing, more interesting things, but basically having an AI that can adapt on the fly to different changing, battlefield situations would be fascinating, and that seems to be one of the main things that they were pushing for this remake. So that alone has me really excited. But why would the rogue be the thing that was kind of the not there? Well, here's the deal. As far as how the AI kind of processes things, obviously, again, it's been rebuilt from scratch, but I'm saying as a general rule, if we look at how they do things in this one, okay? So unit is standing on field. So we have Mr. Steve here, he's just standing there. Basically, what it would do before was to go through and it would be okay, this takes this much time to use, this does this much damage, this takes this much time to use, this will take that much damage, these take this much time for me to move, that'll affect my recovery cost, which is over here, and then all my attack values combined with my different weapons, it decides what will take how much time and do how much damage. They're looking for the highest amount of whatever score was assigned to them to actually accomplish. So basically, it was a combination of how much damage they did, how long it took them to do it, because again, they're getting an RT penalty based on the equipment used, based on the skill used, based on the distance traveled, and then on top of that, they're taking that initial gear stuff, they're combining it with all of their equipment and deciding, or all of their skills rather. And so depending on those skills, they might have more things to check. Like this guy has field alchemy, so suddenly he's like, okay, hold on, let me just take a quick second. Okay, let me find my items. Okay, let me look through all of my items here, and let me just test what each of these items will do on every single unit on the field. If you've ever noticed, they never use the tarot cards. Yeah, that's why. Because they, like, realistically, they maybe used a fourth of this list. Anyway, and then they're like, oh, wait, hold on, just a sec, there's magic too. Let me check every spell I have against every unit on the field, and then we're going to compare it from every angle. So if you ever see them repeatedly going and taking your loot bags, it's not because they're programmed to go take your loot bags, it's because the AI is basically determined, okay, this tile will be good for me because it's given me, you know, like this kind of position versus this, and has basically given me the ability to target this from here at a better accuracy rating, you know, that kind of thing. So in a lot of cases, they ended up taking items and stuff like that on accident simply because the AI was trying to get into a better position. Now look, I know, that's, like, there's a whole, that whole thing needs to be decomplicated for quite a bit. So, okay. Let's take a look at the next thing there. Okay, so how they decomplicate it, they went back to the original classic system of the 4 and 4. So 4 spells, 4 skills. Okay, it's technically actually about twice as, well, literally twice as many as before, because they didn't have finishers before. Those were considered part of that same spell slot. They didn't have skills as a separate thing. Those were, again, part of that spell slot. So technically actually 3 times more skills than they did in classic. So anyway, so basically the way it's been redone, so finishers in this one are just another thing on your skill list. You have a weapon rank that you get up, and then you get finishers that you will use from there. Now, each of these finishers, in practice, or rather in theory, are supposed to be like situational things that help you in certain, you know, oddly specific things. Like, okay, the way they were thinking with the archer here, you got dark weight. The archer early on has issues with its accuracy. Dark weight inflicts leaden. You hit something with leaden, they're 40% more likely to get hit by anything physical. Okay, beautiful, great, that works there. It ends up being a sort of long-range artillery for most of the game because it ends up scaling, you know, it's very consistent, let's just put it that way. Slumber Shot, pretty good. They didn't have any indicator to the fact that it actually checks for physical stuff in the way, so this was kind of a weird jump, because suddenly you have a thing that goes from attacking from the sky to suddenly needing clear line of sight. But then suddenly you have another one that needs clear line of sight, but it shoots from way above. But this is suddenly also your first indication of a elemental scaling version, which, again, this is something you kind of pick up as time goes on, but you end up having an elemental scaling version with a debuff on it, so suddenly you have a ranged unit that benefits from using Mind because it's going to have a debuff that's being attached to its weapon, but also benefits from elemental augments because it's going to have an element attached to this finisher. And so point being, all of this stuff is something that nobody freaking picked up on their first time through, just let's be honest. I mean, again, what is it, like 12 years now straight that I've been playing this dang game, and I'm still figuring stuff out all the time. It's wonderful in terms of depth and in terms of going back and back and back, but good lord, in terms of explaining it when folks are just getting into the series, and the best that you can come up with is just like, keep going at it, trust me, it's the hole just keeps going deeper, you just keep finding new stuff. So their main thing when remaking this was more or less, okay, we need to simplify this somewhat. And the thing is, a lot of that has already been started and already been somewhat experimented with, because that's what One Vision has been doing for the last 5, I think almost 6 years. So again, for anyone that hasn't played the One Vision mod, do that, and you know, just give yourself a pat on the back for making a good decision when doing so. But basically, many of the things that Reborn is doing are the same things that One Vision has been doing. So for example, when I was mentioning that complicated damage formula earlier, see the earlier video in terms of how armor mechanics work in this, but basically the armor mechanics are a 3-stage system that nobody picked up on. I mean, honestly, even long-term players did not pick up on any of how this worked. I don't think anyone had a real solid understanding of how any of it worked until Rakes found the code when doing the One Vision mod. I mean, it's a system that makes a hell of a lot of sense, but it unfortunately is one of those things that the game never explains, and thankfully they do seem to be trying to throw more tutorials into the new version, which is good, because this system is awesome, but man is it not exactly going to be the first thing that comes to mind. Because basically it checks the two people's physical stats against each other, then each weapon and armor and everything else has all these little background stats that, for example, like this thing, right over here, will resist 2% of all elemental damage that's coming in, so that's 2% resistance to whatever that outcome was of that first physical test. And then finally, at the end of it, the actual values of the armor and weapon are calculated against each other to give a final value. So, like, you have a full-blown armor mechanic system, you have a regular RPG system, you have a sort of scaling option that comes from some more freeform RPGs, and all of them are working in tandem, and it allows the system to adapt in many different ways to a lot of different kinds of situations, and do so in a way that feels very logical. It feels very tangible. And so what they did, because people could not really understand it, by the way, I will say I apparently forgot to turn off Discord in the background. If you hear Discord notifications, I'm sorry. Anyway, so, oh crap, let's just, if I nuke the browser, I don't know. Okay, whatever, ignore the Discord notifications. So, okay, so what I'm getting at here, though, is that in order to clue people in, they, again, did what the One Vision mod did, in terms of expanding the numbers. They did about 4 to 5 times the values on health and a lot of other things, in order to better clue people into what's going on there. Basically, like you saw that 7 damage archer, that is what would have been a 1 damage hit in this game, basically just allowing for better understanding of when you're getting a benefit and when you're not. So that's that. Okay, so immediately that's going to be hopefully cluing people into the armor system a bit better. Next, in terms of the magic spells being limited. Okay, look, there's 4 slots. Okay, realistically, and like I've been watching people play this game under different circumstances and whatever else for a long friggin' time now. And generally speaking, people will already know what they want to use ahead of time. They'll usually have their main damaging thing. They'll usually have like a favorite spell they like to use. They'll have some, backup debuff stuff, and maybe something else they just threw on there just to test it out. Honestly, it's enough slots. I understand that whole like D&D feeling of you want to have friggin' 50 spells on you. But that's the thing, it slows down the game, and a lot of what they were trying to push for this one was making the whole experience smoother. So it seems like they've actually done, again, like the One Vision thing did, and combined a lot of things. So basically you would still be getting better value in your spells and abilities, because there's more stuff going on per each thing. So for example, like in the in this one right here, let's actually hop into a shop real quick so I can look at more scrolls here. So like right here, you go over to your water stuff, and like right here, you would just have, oh, wrong one. Like let's say you go down to your poison mist, and it's just poison. So for example, in the One Vision version, it ended up having 2 different versions because there's 2 different poisons, and instead of just one is longer range poison, one of them inflicts weaken, one of them gives a breaching effect, and so basically there's just debuffs attached to other debuffs, and it ends up feeling great. It feels like there's a lot more stuff flying around, and again, that seems to be what they've done with Reborn as well. Obviously, we don't have all the information yet, but they have mentioned combining skills and spells and all that kind of business, so we're essentially still getting stuff. There's just less, basically less for everyone to really have to keep an eye on at all times. Because you know what? You know how it usually went? Usually you end up going in like, okay, well, let's see if this guy can finish somebody off. Oh, they can't finish them off. Okay, let's test out this debuff. Okay, let's test out this debuff. Okay, let's see if this one does some damage. No. Okay, let's test a higher tier one. Okay, maybe we can wait. We'll see about that. Let's see. Maybe we just go buff instead. And then you're just like going down the list and going down the list and going down the list, and it's like, for God's sake, just take your damn turn. That kind of thing. So again, it's just basically smoothing out the experience. Realistically, you know what you want, and if something's interesting, you slot it in. 4 slots will be enough, I guarantee it. Next up, as far as 4 skill slots, okay. This is one of the bits that actually has me really excited, because, okay, we already know weapon specializations and finishers. I mean, that's basically already going to be one of your slots already. Great, fine, whatever. But it also means, more than likely, the physical stats are going to be higher, so hopefully cudgels will not be just an extra throwaway thing for casters. Maybe they'll have some more interesting equip options, because, again, there's a lot more interesting options for casters than sticks, but usually the way it ends up going is people equip cudgels, and they're like, well, I guess that's all they can use, and then never test out anything else. So, like, for example, daggers and shields do actually work pretty well for them and have some interesting implications, but that almost never ends up getting tested. Because, again, wizard needs stick. I put cudgels on there, I have to stick with cudgels, that kind of thing. But here's what has me excited, okay? we've seen that, for example, things like Spell Strike and all that are on the skill list, but since you're so much more limited, you don't want to stack your stuff like this. And many things, like for example, we have not seen augments at all. We've seen units being able to be a particular element, which presumably would be the equivalent of rank 1 or 2 augments, like they traditionally were in the series. But here's the cool part. We've already seen that there's a lot of those field buffs going on, and a lot of those field buffs seem to imply that they'd be able to do a similar role to augments and racial abilities in this one, which would essentially mean that you would be able to just on the fly see these different armor adaptations taking place. Like you've got 3 frontliners, you know, they're fighting the other frontliners, no one's breaking through. Everyone's just kind of going back and forth, healing back up. Okay, no one's breaking through there, but suddenly you see that, you know, there's a thing over there that'll improve the penetration of, like, let's say some of your heavy archer units over there. Okay, great. They're firing at the heavies right now. They're doing no damage. They can't get within range to go hit those guys in the back. Okay, that's fine. So you, like, let's say you have that front line, try to push them forward with shield bashes. Okay. Again, this series is known for kind of making a big deal of how you position your units over doing direct damage. So having those shield bash units pushing them back, great. You know why? Because Steadfast, presumably, is not going to be as much of a thing. Because as much as I love that as an idea for a skill, it essentially meant that a lot of knights were functionally unusable because they didn't have a whole lot of, a whole lot of things to do, so they almost always had Steadfast on their list, meaning that a lot of that shield bashing stuff tend to kind of be relegated to smacking stuff off of cliffs, which is fun and great and I love it, but having the option to literally have a front line just push the other line backwards with their shields in order to, let's say, have a couple of them peel off and go escort your archer to go take that penetration bonus over there to suddenly have them, you know, do effective damage against that front line. Dude, that sounds awesome to me. Like, having this kind of stuff just adapt on the fly, having this AI being able to consider these things, essentially fighting over little benefits that are popping up all over the map and whatever else, having the armor calculations adjust on the fly, having, you know, just having less things to think about when you're going and staring at a unit, like just going down their entire list and, like, you can't even fit the entire list on the screen. Like, it just feels great to me. Like, being able to see, like, okay, that guy is specialized in this. Okay, great, good. We're moving on to the next thing. I love the depth of this system, but being able to keep that depth while also allowing it to be, again, like a field active thing that everyone can adapt to, that has me super excited. I'm really looking forward to that one. Okay, so anyway, so that's good stuff there. As far as I can tell, anatomy might be out, but again, that's good. Again, anatomy was a thing, like, in one vision it was taken out and put only on animals and things. Worked great. You know what? It works fantastic to take that out of there. Because one of the issues this game had was being able to stack too many things, so you could absolutely break the system. So anyway, I'm loving that idea. It has me hyped as all hell. Now, next thing, the removal of random battles. Okay, allow me to explain. Okay, what they have removed is this right here. This shit, this going back and forth, is not, okay? This right here, this is not compelling. This is walking back and forth. This, however, this part where you go into the fight and do stuff, that is still there. And as far as we can tell from the layouts we've seen, from the screenshots we've seen, they are the same fights. They have been given new units, they have been given some different formations, but as far as we can tell, it is still the same old random battle system. You just pick when you can go there. So here's the thing, though. The benefits don't exactly stop there, and yes, I did do a little bit of a cut here because I got a little bit interrupted by a thing, but you know what? The benefits don't stop there, because there's a lot... Okay, one of the things that I see come up a whole lot in terms of dreams for seeing the new version get updated is like, oh, I hope the Chaos frame requirements are changed for Cressida. So, allow me to explain. You see right here, look at the clan down there at the bottom. Unknown, Galgastan, unknown, Bakram, Galgastan. Okay, so, do you remember the intro to the game? Cool, because if you don't, allow me to explain. They say that the majority of the population on the island are Galgastani. This is reflected in the random units, including all of the deserters and whatever else. Because here's the thing. When it comes to Chaos Frame, it is effectively your reputation score with every faction on the map. Now, this whole thing of seeing randos and deserters and whatever else all over the place is kind of an interesting idea, but here's the thing. For one, it doesn't really make sense for everybody to be having this many frickin' skirmishes in very commonly traveled roads, if you think about it. I like to joke about the fact that it's weird how every single ogre game has kind of like a low-key zombie apocalypse, just nobody's talking about. But anyway, the thing is that when you're fighting all of these units, your chaos frame is moving up and down in very minute ways. You're looking at about, like, I think it's like 0.1 or something of reputation per each time that you have a unit of certain nationalities fighting a unit of a certain other nationality. So, for example, if any of your random units or any of the people that you hired along the way happen to be Galgastani, then if you fight any Galgastani unit, your chaos frame is tanking every time that you're taking a random fight. So that whole usual complaint of, oh man, I had to go grind to get my reputation up. Well, if you didn't grind to get your reputation down, you wouldn't have that problem in the first place, which is fixed in Reborn. Basically, because it's training mode, and presumably a neutral faction, every time that we've seen the training mode in action, we've seen that yes, it is effectively just a neutral thing there, essentially meaning that they would be able to well, they would be able to not be taking chaos frame penalties every time that they're doing stuff. So yeah, already a benefit there. That would mean that both Cressida and what's her face, Oshon would be easier to recruit, so there you go. There's that there as well. Now, additionally, one of the main complaints that people had when it came to a lot of the side mission kind of things in the original was like, oh, I had to go look up a guide to go find certain things, and this is not unusual because a lot of the things that were mechanics in the original, like PS1 and SNES versions, similarly got remade when the PSP version got done. For example, the warrior set and its luck bonus seemed really weird in terms of boosting everyone's luck when they wore it, so generally speaking, it was just like, if you had a free slot, sure, what the hell, why not? But it didn't mention these bonuses anywhere. So suddenly when this remake got made, it was a lot more clear with a lot of the effects that certain things had. It was like skill bonuses and racial bonuses and different immunities and all that kind of thing. It had all of that just right there, plain as day. And so having a lot of those things clarified was just kind of a nice little update. But okay, another random interruption there, but yeah, so the reason that I say that all of this is good to clarify is because this whole bonus objective system, again, just feels like it's perfect for this kind of thing. For example, do you remember when you were recruiting Union? Do you remember that time that you had to look up a guide to figure out how to do that? I mean, if there was a little thing that was like, oh, deploy Union here, okay, good. It's a little bit on the nose, but screw it. You get a little cookie for putting that unit there. And then additionally, it gets you on the little sidetrack to go recruit this other unit. So fantastic, It's a nice little way of taking some of the stuff that was a little bit more archaic in the background and maybe putting it a little bit more in the forefront. And we already know that all of the old Warren Report stuff is still there, so if you want the old method of figuring out the hows and whys, sure, they're absolutely there. Hell, as far as we know, certain things might potentially be unlocked in that same method. I mean, if you don't remember about what the deal is with Union, basically you specifically have to go and you have to take a specific dialogue choice in order to recruit a guy that's part of the Galgastani side to your side as part of like a sort of a prisoner saving kind of thing. Because once you show up at the castle where his captives are keeping him, it's weird that the commander guy is basically like, well, gee, you guys must be here for all those prisoners we have downstairs. Like, wait, we never said anything about that. Well, that's a shame if you were to go get them. Hint, hint. And so basically, it's like as the story is progressing, it's more or less written off as just, well, okay, that's weird. Screw it, moving on. But if you end up going and reading all the background stuff going on, you basically see the whole political net that his whole family was in. That they wanted to defect to your side, but they can't, because then functionally their whole family would just end up dead and more or less have their name dragged through the mud forever. So their whole choice is like, well, we will kind of low-key just kind of play dumb here and just kind of let a couple of the family members do a little honorable sacrifice thing here in order to just kind of stem the flow of issues, and maybe get some of these guys fighting for the other side, help the other side win, plus reinforce them a bit. Plus then if the dude that you end up saving was essentially involved with another character that you later meet in Chapter 4, but in order to have that unlocked, you have to have him deployed for a fight, and you have to have heard about the news that the previous Castellan's father there ended up offing himself, basically as part of a legal thingy to transfer ownership over to the Wallister side there, because basically this is on law. In order for all this to happen, again, like you have to be paying attention to the news in the background. So this all being the case, it basically allows for a little bit more of a hint as far as what's available when. And additionally, we've seen those little pop-ups that I've been talking about for years needing to be in this game, wherein you've got the little pop-ups that say, hey, new shit in Warren Report, go read it. Go figure out the news, because stuff's happening, and you're going to want to hear about that, because you know what, there's way more going on in the background than people realize. Because again, the Warden Report is one of those things that technically a lot of folks were first introduced to in Final Fantasy Tactics, where it was, I forget, I think it wasn't the Chronicle, that was something else. I'm thinking of Triangle for Chronicle. What the hell was it called in that one? I think it was, what's his face? Not Alakazam. Wizard guy from the intro. Anyway, point being, he's the not Warren of that game. But the dude that's writing the reports in the background, and mostly it just gives little bios, and it somewhat updates them, but let's be honest, you usually read it the first time that you opened up the game, and you're like, wow, this is neat, I'll remember to read this, and then you never do until you get to the ghosts in the mine bit, because somebody told you about that in a guide, and there you go. That's the 2 times you're going to use the report function in that game. But in this one, if you didn't know, it is updating every frickin' person's bio the entire time that you're doing this. There's obviously the news of the day, which this entire list is not for the entire game. This changes constantly. But then every single character has an updated bio sheet throughout the entire goddamn game. Can you imagine how much effort it takes to script all this? Holy crap, man. That isn't... it just blows my mind every time. Anyway, so, point being is that, yeah, there's constantly stuff going on in the background. And again, if you just want to rewatch scenes, obviously there's this whole thing, and this is half of the scenes. The rest of the scenes you can go rewatch in the Wheel Tarot and all that kind of thing. Some of them you can rewatch, some of them are just map previews. Anyway, point being that, yes, there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and I feel that whole bonus objective thing is an excellent way of at least cluing people into the amount of just absolutely crazy stuff going on. On top of that, in terms of other changes, like I mentioned earlier, the adaptable AI thing, there's one thing that comes to mind in particular is right here, Barnicia, right? So that's one of those fights where you've got back-to-back castle walls and all that kind of thing, and there's a bunch of fights that are back-to-back castle walls, and have you noticed that possibly the 2 that you remember the most are going to be the Barnicia 3 fight, where you're essentially technically there's Barnicia 3, where you're fighting up the actually, no, wait, I'm thinking about Heim. Okay, I'm thinking about Heim 3, sorry, where you're basically fighting the knights and the ninjas up a staircase, and then you got the other one that's the elderly wizards in Almorica Castle. And do you know why those are generally the 2 most memorable? Because those are the ones where the AI, back in the original one, okay? Back in the original, like, SNES and PS1 version, those were the times that the AI would simply understand, like, it had a general understanding of the ranges of different units involved. Now, yes, it was breakable, yes, it was adjustable, yes, you could trick it. I mean, we're talking about a decades-old AI at this point, but generally speaking, they understood, holy crap, guys, we got walls, we can use that stuff. So, for example, the archers, if there were archers up on the ramparts, they stayed there. And if you notice the design differences, specifically in Heim there, the archers don't have the choice to leave their ramparts, and for some reason, at some point, somebody decided to change some of them into hawkmen so that they do have the option to leave, which just... why? As much as I love pretty much every little detail of this game, when it comes to, like, for example, you got the snow castle, and you got the archers up there, and a couple rounds into the fight, Canopus is like, yeah, we should go send some wing units up there to go deal with those archers before we go into a kill zone. It's like, A, no, you, sir, are going to go shoot that archer, or shoot that wizard in the face, and we're leaving. And for another thing, those same archers just flew into the middle of the map for some reason to go get a better shot at our clerics. So, no, we're just going to have our ninja guy go stab those if somehow this fight lasts to round 3. So basically, when we've seen those previews of how the new AI is potentially doing things, for example, there was the Mercure fight. He had sent his golems up front. He had positioned himself along with some of his other units along the top ramparts of his castle, so maybe this time you'll actually have to go around that whole staircase to deal with him, maybe send some wing units up front, maybe they'll have some shield units to continue bashing them off of there, maybe they'll have archers with, with all their leadening shots. We have to realize that with finishers, obviously stuff has changed quite a bit where they're not the heavy damage option anymore, and I love that because, again, it's a lot like One Vision, where you have some that are damage options, but the majority are meant to be utility skills. So, for example, like that weighted shot that I mentioned earlier, or leaded shot, whatever, it's essentially something that should be used by archers to improve their accuracy versus other units, or to basically cause a unit to be stuck in the mud, more or less, which is fantastic, and it's a great historical nod as well, because like way back in the day, one of the things that people were afraid of is getting shot in the foot and then getting hacked down because they couldn't maneuver. So basically, when it comes to all that, like, think about it, like having your units function as, like, being able to use all these debuffs to better position everybody to just better work as a team. Again, it just gets me excited thinking about all that, all the potential applications of all this. Because again, we've seen this in One Vision, and if somebody went and gave it like the full, basically that's what Reborn's doing. It's like giving it the full treatment and then taking it up a notch, because they actually have the option to alter mechanics. So it's fantastic to see something like that there as well. Now, do I wish they would have taken it a step further and also introduced one-handed spears? Hell yeah, because spear and shield is awesome. But so far we haven't seen that, so far as we know. Anyway, so point being, yes, there's a lot of more strategic, interesting application, because this series is about interesting strategy. It's not about the damage crap. Like, too many SRPGs fall into that trap of, like, how do I stack damage, and it's like, just stop. There's no interesting strategy in blow dude away with a cannon, it's just... And yes, I realize that many challenge runs do effectively end up attempting to create that out of random garbage, but that's just fun to do, It's just... it's interesting when there's those strategic opportunities to go and just change things, to adapt to a changing situation, and that's, again, what has this new AI idea just seeming so interesting to me. Because we've already seen the different ways that they deploy their formations. We've seen that they're more likely to encircle. We've seen that they seem to be more able to kind of line up their lines in a way that makes sense. We've seen a few cases where there were knights essentially going and setting up specific walls. So, for example, before, knights would kind of try, but they would mostly set up a situation where, like, they were just kind of bundled up in a wall, and they'd just try to directly block you. In this particular case, it looks like instead we're going to have a situation where those knights will be going in and like lining up their different rampart auras in a way that'll effectively block you off. Again, in a way that doesn't involve just turning into a roadblock. Basically, seeing two knights coming in for a sandwich maneuver, all that kind of thing, sounds very interesting. It just makes me happy. It just makes me happy thinking about the possibilities of all these things. So, as far as the rogue being removed, if that's the price to pay, sure, fine. But realistically, I want you to all remember that Angel Knights, Liches, 4 of the Coda chapters, these were all things that were later added in as just free DLC in the original version because they never could get around to it. There's absolutely no reason to think that that won't just simply happen again. So, something to potentially look forward to there as well. So there's a non-zero chance. I mean, if the game doesn't officially add rogues in, let's be honest, mods are going to get on that pretty quick. Because even though the official team may have run into some potential issue, mods have a tendency to be run by some pretty insane cricket people that'll end up making it happen one way or another. So yeah, you know what? Praise to all those folks. But, you know, at least give some credit where it's due. They seem to have a pretty solid understanding of the kinds of stuff that needed to be changed. Now, next on the permadeath system, because I've seen a lot of different takes on this one as well. Because personally, I personally feel that that they've gone the right way with this one, though I would have taken it one step further and maybe not had the option to revive, though, or at least had a mode without the option to revive, because it definitely does, you know, make sense for most purposes for it to be there. I know personally I probably will end up just plain not using it, but either way, it's nice to have there as an option, but I hope it is as expensive as it was in earlier games. And by the way, I am getting to the economy thing in just a moment, because when it comes to revives and whatever else, you have to realize that throughout the series, losing units is part of the main charm of this whole thing, and that sounds like a weird thing to say, especially I hear folks saying things like, well, I had to go restart the game because I didn't want to miss out on scenes, I didn't want to miss out on this stuff, I am losing out on content, and you should not lose content when you're going and you're playing your game. Listen, buddy, it's not that way. It's not that way. The game has different content for you if you lost those units. That's what's great about it. When you see a unit get killed off and then suddenly it's like, oh, I lost that unit, but wait, that scene, it changed. It did something interesting this time. You know, it's like it didn't just swap it out with a generic. They'll do that in some cases, sure. But basically, they'll have a ton of cases where they'll simply just have a completely different scene. Like one of my favorite discoveries recently, because I never ended up making this happen, was going through neutral specifically. Well, I mean chaos in that case, but whatever. Was heading towards neutral, and there's that whole bit around the middle where you're dealing with the Bachram resistance and all of their members joining you. Now, their units, all three of them, are pretty strong and have a pretty good chance of surviving. Yes, I am including Sistina because she is pretty strong in her second outing. Technically speaking, she's pretty strong in her first one too, but due to the fact that your units are probably stronger, she ends up getting singled out. That's another one of those cases where having a more adaptable AI, again, one of those things that I see held up as it was just a loud, casual opinion. Like, dude, we all complained about Sistina. What do you think is the first thing they fixed? But, okay, so going through that thing, those units almost never die. But that particular time, I went and I backstabbed every single one of them to make sure that they couldn't exist in that run. And, interestingly enough, like, the entire mood of the run changed entirely. Because instead of like, oh, you know, we're helping them, we're not helping them, you're like, oh, you know, this person survived, okay, that person didn't survive, okay, then I guess we're just not going to help. Or, oh, everybody survived, okay, fine, I guess we'd be assholes not to help. You know, clearly there's this whole faction that we could be saving. Instead, they all died, and it's just Denim just staring out into the ocean, and Casual comes up, she's like, we owed them nothing, and we survived. Get your whiny ass on this boat. It's like, man, cold, I gotta say, she turns cold in that situation. But, I mean, granted, she turns cold in a lot of situations, but still, I love seeing that constant adaptation, seeing different combinations of units alive or dead for different scenes. Like, there's scenes that you would completely not think certain units would show up for that they happily do. How many different iterations are there of the time that you, like, run into the Pope later on in Chapter 4? It's ridiculous how many versions of that are there. And sure, there's the usual random ones of just, you know, whatever units happen to be standing in a scene. Some of them are placeholder, but just the dynamic between all the characters changes completely. And you can have all of the named characters dead, and even then you have more interesting scenes. It just changes the tone. This game nails its tone when it tries to go for all this stuff. Again, that's one of its big charm things. It's not like the characters are just well written to be written. They're not written out because they have a good character sheet. They're written because they react to the world they're in. That's why they're interesting. That's why this setting is interesting. Even the generics. Like, I've seen so many mentions of, you know, the name generics like your Tammuz and your Festa and your Sarah and your Voltaire and stuff, that they all need to have specific portraits, but I feel like that would take away from their specialty. Because, again, there's a TV tropes thing about this, known as the Ascended Generic. That they're a unit that has essentially, gone above and beyond to become something completely different, to become just better, to just kind of be a special character in their own right, in their own way. Like, for example, the main reason that I have a Felicia 2 on this team is because a lot of the times I will specifically let Donalto killed because, for whatever reason, it always feels like Felicia is just a lucky charm to my team. It doesn't matter that they're just a generic with a different name, they just feel like they've got, you know, more interesting setup there. It just feels like that run is going to be a little bit more lucky with her on the team. Or, for example, like I constantly love going through neutral because I think one of my favorite characters in the entire game is one of those Ascended extras. It's Mr. Tammuz. Because what's his deal? Is he special? Is he some high-ranking thing? No, he's just an old guy that refuses to die. The dude's in his 40s and has freakishly high vitality compared to pretty much every other unit around. And, like, their whole thing is just he's got no skills to really speak of. He's really underskilled by that point. And they're like, oh, you know, this guy has been knocked out and has somehow survived again and again and again. This old fart refuses to die. Like, I just love that, you know? That's way more interesting to me than, like, oh, this was their relationship with this faction, and then they were betrayed by, you know, this family line over here, and their whole dynasty over here was changed due to this political climate over here. And, like, I don't care. That dude's stubborn. I like him. So, anyway, point being, a lot of this stuff is left as it is because it's charming as hell, okay? Not everything has to be perfectly polished. Sometimes you just find a good rock, you like that rock. It doesn't need to be shined into a frickin' stone, you know what? Sometimes you find that beat-up Ford Taurus and like, man, that thing's got class, you know what? That thing has taken a beating and somehow is still, like, ticking from the 90s. Whatever, you know? It's a rust bucket, but I love it kind of thing. So, point being, you know, again, I feel like a lot of that stuff is just super charming. A lot of the weapons in this game, very niche uses, but again, you know, they're there for charming reasons. Like, realistically, do you need to use the Caldia as a weapon that has finishers? No. Do you have the option? Sure. It's just there if you want it. Maybe you'll find something interesting to do with it. Who cares? It's cool. It's fun. It's neat, you know? Like, was there a reason for Knight of Lotus to have a set effect that allowed you to eat your own armor for 10% health? No. Was there a reason to give you that entire thing only in chapter, like, the frickin', like, final 2 fights of the game? No, there's nothing overpowered about it. But still, you know, it's just a neat thing that it's there. There's a lot of stuff that's just there because it's funny, you know? Like, again, the fact that you have to go through all the extra hoops and everything else to get the crafting book for the dragon helmet. It seems like... Look, I had this opinion myself until I played Ogre Battle 64. Of like, why did they forget something there? Is this cut content? Why do you have to go through all this extra shit to go get that helmet? It's not even better than the one that you upgrade to get it. It's all for the sake of a reference. In OB64... one of the things that ends up getting kind of memed at for that game is the fact that to get your, like, one and only Dragoon, I think that technically you can get two, but to my knowledge, effectively one, Dragoon, you basically have to go through this whole thing where you have to show up on at a place on a specific day for, like, a meteor to land or something, to go get some specific kind of metal, to go save this blacksmith guy, to go get him to make the armor, but he doesn't remember how to get the helmet, so you have to find somebody that knows how to make the helmet. And then eventually you have to go and carve the actual the Tiamat sword out of the soul of a ghost of a dead dragon that ate the final Dragoon, and then you can make your own Dragoon. And oh yeah, now I remember how you get the second Dragoon. You can use I think it's like a 11 piece or whatever else on one of the rando enemy teams. So technically, there's a second. There can be more than only one. Actually, I think, wasn't he implied to be the one that got eaten by that dragon? I don't know. Anyway, doesn't matter. Who cares? Time paradoxes aside, it was just a weird little side quest to go get a unit that's basically available just wherever for the rest of the series, more or less. I mean, granted, there were only a couple that you could get in March of the Black Queen. Whatever. Ogre Battle doesn't like Dragoons. Point being, you had to get a specific different crafting book. You had to go get a special helmet. You had to go on a quest to go get a special feather for it. You had to go through all this extra stuff to make a helmet that you can basically just get for free off random enemy units. And again, all of that's just there as a joke. It's there as an option if you specifically need it, but it's just there. Okay. Now let's get back to more kind of tangible things in terms of the economy and in terms of what's available where. So, okay. Economically, this game has always had a bit of a limited economy, but you could always infinite grind. Now, I've seen folks saying that you can essentially screw yourself, but I don't think that's the case. In fact, I'm pretty sure that you're going to still have probably infinite pools of something or other at some point somewhere. I doubt that it's going to be a complete hard-locked economy like it was in OB64, which, again, people found that plenty playable. It turns out people are not as likely to completely screw themselves as folks may think. Shocker. But anyway, so I will say, I'm sure you do get something that allows you to still generate money and all that kind of thing. I just don't think it'll be as ridiculous as it was in this one, because as you can see right here, one of the strategies I'm using for this level 1 run is to repeatedly run into deserters on this river map and repeatedly beat the hell out of them, because they have a slightly higher drop rate for slightly better equipment than Tynemouth Hill, which means that they're less likely to drop cards. Even though I needed cards, I get cards from dragons which have better tier loot, which means that they're more likely to drop cards, which meant that I could use them to train Draconology and get Denim up to an insane level. But on this particular map, I'm essentially abusing the fact that their drop table is full of expensive items that they don't seem to be particularly attached to more or less farm infinite money in order to farm infinite paradigm shifts, to infinitely cause time paradoxes, to infinitely allow for spamming war dances for infinite TP and infinite finishers on a unit that has higher stats for the ability to one-shot things at level 1. I mean, okay. Look, as a challenge runner, I appreciate this completely asinine bullshit, but for the average player, they will just frickin' leave. The door will be swinging shut by the time you get halfway through that description. So, I'm not saying that this was a casual fight or anything. I'm just saying I'm sure there still will be ways to grind. We have seen that Farampa is still there, and if I were to guess, there will probably be a lot of the same side areas, but they'll probably be available sooner. Like, let's say you probably go into Farampa, you get a couple maps at first, then you get access to the original kind of Chapter 2 setup, then your Chapter 3, then your Chapter 4. Farampa's always been there, okay? So Farampa's always kind of been there in terms of just kind of being an infinite grind of whatever you want to have, and it's a nice, really pleasantly designed way to do so. Because you've got branching paths, you can go for different areas, the music is very pleasant, the maps are nice and big and pretty to look at. It's a nice, it's your standard MMO, grind field. It just feels good to visit, despite the fact that it is effectively just a gigantic loot pinata. And still, if that's what you're after, that's what you're after. But if you're just looking for skills, if you're just looking to improve your characters up to a certain point, which I love the fact that they put in a level cap, which we'll get to that in just a sec. But if you're just looking to improve skills on your units, then previously what you do is essentially go in, you fight a couple units, and you retreat before you end up getting the experience for those skills. Or for those kills, sorry. Because if you didn't get a kill, you got no experience. So basically, if you wanted to infinitely train your skills, that was the way to do it. But in this particular case, if you don't want to do that, and you don't want to accidentally level screw yourself, because if you reach the level 30 wall, well, you kind of needed to know what to do about it, and let's be honest, most players didn't. Which meant that was kind of far more of a problem than not being able to complete the game at level 1 immediately. So point being, the system makes more sense. You cannot level screw yourself, which meant that automatically you don't have to have super amazing versions of all those units, basically cutting out half the potential work for setting up a lot of these fights. Okay, so when they were going and redoing it, I will say that much right away. You had New Game Plus versions. There were technically New Game versions that were available for pretty much everything in the game, right? So you go to Tynemouth Hill, you wanted to get your Dragon Slayer set early, you could technically just grind any class up to, I think it was level 23, that caused the shift to happen, and then you further train them up to about 26, at which point they could carry the entire dragon set in different pieces and different rarities, all that kind of thing. But the interesting part of it was the fact that you could effectively farm these infinitely, meaning that you could get endgame and elemental weapons in Tynemouth Hill in Chapter 1 pretty much immediately. But this version was different from the later New Game Plus version, because when you came back, they had completely different skills. But if you had the scaled version, they technically had a different setup. That was sort of like a 1.5 between the two versions, which basically meant that it was a whole extra version of every single fight and multiple different variations that they had to do for every single thing in the early game, because they allowed people to access this sort of kind of New Game Plus but not really mode. I just call it scaled mode, but whatever else. So basically, A, that allows for cutting down the amount of time that it would need to do all that stuff, but B, it allows for people to not accidentally screw themselves in that way, while still allowing for people to still train, still allowing for people to do the same old stuff that they wanted to do. You just want to have a fight, you go have a fight. You want to do the training part, you do the training part. You want to go do your loot stuff, presumably you go to Farampa or something. I don't know. They will have an option for that, I guarantee it. Again, the people that were balancing this, they're used to working on MMOs, they're used to making systems that allow you to grind, but still keep you in a state of sanity, while still allowing a lot of options to potentially cheese stuff. So look, it's fine. It will all be there. It's good. I promise. I'm very confident in what these people are doing there. Absolutely confident that it's going to be fine. Okay, so that part, all well and good. I don't think we'll have to worry much about the economy because, again, a lot of the money that was previously wasted on multi-crafting and whatever else also is 100% now. I just don't think we'll be having that issue, but I think it will be a bit more clear and a bit more tangible as far as how your money situation actually is. You don't have functionally infinite cash whenever you want it, which, yeah, I would definitely prefer that because you could easily be a freaking millionaire with no issue whatsoever in this game. All right, so next up in terms of rebuilding and charms and all that kind of thing next, because I feel like that's also a pretty cool thing. So I mentioned earlier, obviously, it's pretty interesting when the story adapts to the units that die, but what about your generics? They're not showing up in any story stuff. This isn't Felseal. So I think this will actually end up being pretty interesting too, because they essentially have the ability to more or less kind of create whatever units you want, depending on where you are in the game. So being put at a particular level cap, I feel, is pretty good. Basically just, again, means that you can't really curb stomp the game at any point, which was a specific stated goal of the developers, because really that is a major weakness of the PSP version. That there are a lot of ways that you could potentially break it to more or less mitigate a lot of the kind of core part of the story. The annoying part is that it's not that it's completely imbalanced, because it's this weird kind of dynamic where early on, it's kind of taking it easy on you, and they kind of seem to think that people would be playing a lot worse than they did. So, for example, around the end of Chapter 1, even just without doing any additional grind or whatever else, you can get to the point that you have units that are just one-tapping stuff. You can accidentally stack a particular class and then suddenly realize you're super over-leveled. Then you end up getting those units later scaled up on with gear that they can't possibly compete against. And what's funny is that it's not really necessarily a completely insurmountable wall. You just have to really know what you're doing. But just, yeah, the lack of a level cap was really kind of an issue in this version. Because, again, a lot of folks like particular classes, and if you're sticking with, if you're sticking with 2 or 3 classes, you're going to accidentally end up getting yourself scaled up on right at the very end of the game. Hopefully you might just barely skate by depending on what classes you're using. If you're using 3 or 4, you'll be consistently leveled, pretty much over-leveled throughout the course of the game, but if you end up going for about 4 or 5, you may potentially end up even average or below that mark, and then anything beyond that, if you like having every unit as a different class or something. Like, personally, my go-to was always having 2 units with an occasional named third for each particular class, just because I like the way that looked. But basically, this meant that you could potentially end up having to, well, you didn't have to, but you ended up with a very wide spread of what was available to you. So just kind of your spread of experience was very Pokemon-esque in a way, where if you just had a few on your team, they would end up being way too strong. But unlike Pokemon, there you have that scaling mode. So it effectively was a sort of check on you becoming overpowered by basically stomping new players flat in the case that they ended up in that situation. And many didn't realize that they could just switch to a different class, which seems to be what they were hoping that people would figure out. Bear in mind, a lot of things in this game were designed in a way that they were expected, like they did specifically say in interviews that people were expected to just sort of figure it out. Like with the Sistina fight, they specifically made it that way with the assumption that people would realize, wait, if I put less stuff on people, they will be faster and they'll be able to get to her faster and save her faster. They specifically made that fight that way. Unfortunately, most people just took it as, wow, this AI is dumb as a brick, that she is completely unsavable, because, again, they vastly underestimated people's stubbornness in terms of being happy to figure stuff out when it comes to grinding, but absolutely hating to problem solve on the fly. But anyway, so we know that was already a thing, so in this particular case, it seemed like what they had hoped for was that people would figure out how to, what I like to call level loop people, wherein they would essentially take that unit, they would get to a specific level, that level would get to be a problem for them, they would throw them into a lower level class that still used similar skills to them, then they would be able to go back a second time through those, through those lower levels. They would be getting those little base stat bonuses off of every level up, which would then cause them to be exponentially more powerful for reasons that they didn't realize, because who the hell was figuring out that their stats were going up by decimals in the background, and then all of this was then combining to a high skill, high stat unit, and it's a very nice feeling but confusing meta to explain. And again, the hows and whys oftentimes just confuse the hell out of people. So just seeing all the levels combined, and having the option to basically raise units up as you will, should allow for units that basically have far more variation in terms of who's good at what, maybe having more options for specializations, and basically not feeling as much of a hit when a unit, if a unit is lost, it's a thing that happened. You deal with it, you live, you move on, you make new units. A big theme of this game, and one of the main things that they were going for when they were making the original, is that feeling of loss, that feeling of everything is overwhelming and you're doing the best that you can to carve some kind of happy resolution out of a completely fucked situation. That's supposed to be the feeling of the game, not, hey look, my team of heroes managed to get through this entire thing without so much as a scratch. Oh man, this was so easy because they're super overpowered now. It's almost like the game was balanced for this. By the way, have I mentioned how I'm looking forward to doing challenge runs without doing this? Because, this is almost 13,000 steps back and forth between these two towns. Which, by the way, interesting note, when you get into Coda, the ages of all your characters update. I can't wait to see what his age is. Anyway, so, point being, I'm really glad they merged levels into something that's far more understandable. As much as the base stat system is nice and cheesable and everything else, I will be glad to see more of a traditional thing out of it. It will be cool to be able to not have to send people into fights repeatedly to go get skills up, to go build up all of these stacks of interesting, things that people are doing, and instead just have them out as field items. It'll be interesting to see. The main thing I'm looking forward to is having an AI that can adapt on the fly, and they've made a big deal of the fact that it can do this. And if honestly, when it comes to the rogue, I don't think I even fully explained how, when they had to go check all of that, the reason that they seemingly were given a special AI, they did actually have a special version apparently in this one, is the fact that their traps didn't really work like anything else in the game, and steel also didn't really have much of a much of a real use, especially in the new case. Now, yes, technically you could use it to steal equipment in a couple cases. You used it to steal the Reaver Ring. I guarantee that'll probably just be added as a additional thing on that map. If you deploy a rogue on this, or not a rogue, but let's say you deploy a particular kind of unit on that map, where you kill off the blue guy, you get the you just get the ring now. It was just kind of a way to throw it in there. When it comes to the ogre set, I'm pretty sure you'll just get it by beating the guy, as you always could have. You just could technically steal it before. It's just steel was never quite fleshed out, and its main purpose was to kind of refund you for items that were lost while crafting. So technically speaking, in that role, it doesn't have a purpose anymore. I was hoping for a fell seal kind of thing where you could steal items back and forth, but as you can kind of imagine, that would definitely be weighed in the AI's favor anyway, because we're talking about a situation where if it were to work that way, that you only have 4 items on every unit, and if you have everything combined into MP, then you basically have you could have a whole team of rogues just suddenly show up, steal all your crap, and then, basically you're stuck there trying to steal it all back. More than likely, they were probably having some sort of issue with having it prioritizing what kind of stuff to steal if they were going for that kind of system. When it came to traps, again, we just kind of double all the previous things from combining the I didn't even mention the fact that they take map effects into consideration, because yes, depending on the weather, depending on the prevailing element of the map, because if you didn't know, if you spam a particular element on a map, it will become stronger. It basically increases the maximum and decreases the maximum of the opposing element, depending on whatever element is used. They all kind of function independently, but will scale each other out to some degree, always kind of going towards making everything more intense. So if everybody is spamming all their elements back and forth, max damage can go across, just go crazy across the field. This seemed to be a sort of subtle way to break stalemates. So again, that's always a thing too, so they have to consider that, and they have to consider what tiles to put stuff on. They would have to consider the positioning of each of the units, then try to predict movement based on those units. Then if they were keeping the same effects as before, they would have to keep in mind what the prevailing elements were in terms of what kind of traps to use. Then they would have to prioritize what kind of debuffs were attached to each of those traps. Like, you would basically eventually wind up with an AI that would functionally be sitting there trying to find the perfect way to completely cover a buff card in traps, which just sounds like it would be a pain in the ass, if we're honest, because that is the eventual thing it would probably come up with, as like, that's a priority target, let's cover it in traps, this is gonna suck. Which I would much rather have ramparts and all that kind of thing in that place. You know, barricades, ramparts, all that kind of thing. Sounds like a lot more fun than dealing with your units and getting nuked and breached over and over. So either way, I'm assuming it probably was something like that, where they just couldn't get it to be random enough, or it just didn't, like, it honestly, invisible traps all over the place do not sound fun. It would just kind of give a constant feeling of unease, and general, like, game flow seems to be a big purpose of a lot of what they're going for in this remake. So we already know that, you know, it seems like choices in terms of kind of the back setup portion seem to be simplified in terms of, you know what you want to build. Don't get too crazy with it. Like, don't get too kind of lost in thought. You're not going to sit there in your menu far more than actually playing the game, which is fine, because let's be honest, most of the time when it came to the PSP version, we would set up a class, we would spend forever tinkering and tuning with it, and then be scared to move anything around, because we'd immediately forget what the hell was even going on with that unit. We'd suddenly have this completely different setup, and it would just be confusing as all hell. Alright. Okay, so, another little pause there, but okay. So, I think probably the last thing to cover here before I go on ranting about this for hours is just the fact that, you know what, when it comes to the platforms that it's even coming out on, that in itself is something to get excited for. Like, I'm not even talking about the visual or graphical or whatever else stuff, which, by the way, the visuals and graphical stuff looks fantastic. And for anyone that's worried about the voice acting, look, it's been a pretty standard thing for Square Enix stuff for a while to allow you to turn off the voices, because, let's be honest, the voices aren't for everyone, and I know personally, I'm probably going to go back to hearing the old prrrr for everybody talking, because I just prefer the clicks myself. But you know what? I'm going to give it a go just to see how it goes, because so far a lot of the voices have sounded pretty legit on both ends. And again, I'm kind of loving the fact that they seem to have picked everybody based entirely off of visuals. It's such an interesting take on picking your voice actors, you know? Anyway, so, okay, so as far as the platforms, right? Now, they could have gone a few different ways with this, but, like, Switch and PS4 are pretty obvious ones. I don't know why you'd put it on Xbox. Obviously, it's going to be probably on Game Pass, and we already know PC, but a lot of very popular platforms that really have been kind of wanting something like this for a while. PS4 has generally got some of the more intense stuff, like you got your Divinity and your XCOM 2 and all that kind of thing, but generally speaking, not a whole lot of stuff like this. Probably the closest thing is probably like a Mass Effect kind of deal, which isn't exactly an SRPG, but it'll be awesome to see on there. On the Switch, again, it's kind of nice seeing it back on a Nintendo thing, which is funny, I know, considering my 3 favorite versions are all on Sony stuff, but it's just kind of, it feels like a return to form. And now that I think about it, I say 3 of my favorite versions, like, really, PSP is my favorite, Naughty Lotus is my second favorite, and then it's like March of the Black Queen Limited Edition, and then PS1 Lucked. But either way, well, I guess technically also OB64 in there, but that was just super weird to quantify, because it's one of those games where you start trying to explain why you like it, and then you start questioning why you do, but then you just go back to playing it because you like it, but you don't know why, kind of thing. Man, that game's so charming for reasons that I completely cannot quantify. Okay, so back to it though, but just seeing it on something like the Switch, I may not personally appreciate the Switch as much as something like the GBA or whatever else, but you know, it's just nice to see it on something that you can technically put in a bag or something. It's portable-esque. That's as good as we're getting right now, I guess. Now, technically, I saw a lot of people getting excited to put it on the Steam Deck too. Which, yeah, if you want a chunky, expensive Switch, then there you go. You got that too. I joke at the Steam Deck, but I'll be honest, I can't afford one. Honestly, I don't think I'd want one anyway, because the Switch is really already like larger than I'm comfortable with for a device. So that kind of is what it is. It's funny, I was originally going to buy it on PS4 because I wanted to play it on the Vita, but then the input delay was more than I kind of liked, so yeah. Because the original thing was literally just like right now we're playing at the Vita, and I was going to just have it remote play, and then I tried it, and yeah, the input lag was like a full 3/4 of a second. I'm like, this is not going to be playable. There's no way in hell we're doing content stuff with that kind of delay on it. But it's really cool seeing it go on something like the Switch, because you know what? Clearly, they must be starved for SRPGs when, triangle strategy is considered groundbreaking. So, it needs to be shown how it's done. So, it's going to be great to see that on there. I think that's probably the main reason I'm kind of looking forward to it on ye old, wide Game Boy here. Man, this thing is just weird. Why is it so wide? It's like I keep thinking, like, if they kind of just made it slightly short. Well, I guess technically that's what the Switch Lite is, but if we're being honest, I can't exactly make videos on that, so whatever. Anyway, so I think that's about what I wanted to cover on this one. I am extremely excited for 1,000,001 reasons. It's just great to see, like, in my opinion, everything that I've seen points to the fact that they understood what was there. Like, yeah, there's less skill slots, but it doesn't matter, because the field buffs are essentially taking up a lot of the stuff that would have been boring passives before, and essentially, like, look, I understand that there's going to be the usual pessimistic thing that will show up in the comments, like always, like, oh, that means I just have to do more work now, and, you don't. It's a more interesting thing. It is more interesting to have your attack bonuses on the field instead of something you stack up beforehand, because instead of having an Alpha Strike piece of artillery, you roll out and just kind of insta-nuke the map, you actually play the game. But essentially, having combined skills and having combined spells means that we're going to get a lot more active effects going on at any given time. We're essentially going to have, again, an adaptable AI, so we'll see more locations getting used on these maps. We've already seen some of them in action, so I'm positive that's the case. By the way, there's a couple people that keep asking if I'm smacking myself in the face when I'm doing this. I'm like, no, I'm doing like the whole like fist in the hand thing. I don't know, I'm used to sometimes just talking with my hands. That's why I have this on autoplay every now and then. Anyway, so point being, yes, it just feels like it's going to be great for that. Actually, one more thing I mentioned, I touched on this earlier, but most people don't really watch these videos this far. But when it came to the fact that training mode is made safe, like, it's always been safe. You could always just retreat as soon as somebody got knocked out. There's, like, realistically, the only time that you would randomly lose somebody or make an active risk is when somebody just randomly took 2 crits back-to-back and got knocked off a cliff or something. And then that was really just more annoying than immersive, which, again, made more sense in the original version where death was around every corner, but in this new version where essentially you still have death around every corner, but it's only when you're actively in conflict zones, but then you have your safety zones. That feels good to me. Like, that feels like exactly what it wanted to be. Feels right. Again, we have the original folks that came up with this stuff. They know what they were aiming for in the first place, and it seems like everything is going where it should be going. So I'm excited as all hell. I can't wait. We have exactly a month to go. If you randomly hear a dog barking in the background, it's probably the dog barking in the background. Anyway, I know I'm extremely excited. I cannot wait. This next 30 days cannot pass fast enough. Man, oh man, every time I say that, something terrible happens and stuff gets super stressful, so I really hope that's not the case. But still, a month to go. I can't wait. Yeah, put whatever stuff you want to see covered for this game. Right now, until release, I've got 2 things I want to get done, because I'm trying to, well, actually 3, okay, maybe 4. Okay, I have several things I want to get done for, like, channel-wise. I was hoping to get level 1 done before release. I know that One Vision 1.0 is also racing towards that same goal. I was hoping to have a trigonal strategy no camp run, as long as I don't just throw that in the dumpster and just put out whatever was done so far, because honestly that run's just kind of pissing me off at this point. It hasn't actually gotten more difficult, it's just gotten more boring. And what else? And yeah, all of the know your unit. I was hoping to hopefully go through at least most of the classes by the time we hit release. And then technically there was an armored core thing I was doing in the background and got like 90% of the way done and then haven't picked it up since. So either way, that'll happen whenever happening happens. And yeah, so thank you guys for your support as always. It's been great to see how much you know, how much has been coming towards this particular little niche of the world. And yeah, can't wait. It's we got the new war crime simulator coming to the wide Game Boy in 1 month. All right, see you soon.